Rip City Mornings.
A fantastic column in the Oregonian written by our next guest, and one of the lines in the column says that this is a move that shatters much of our established identity as Oregonians. Bill Oram joins the show, and it's funny, Bill, with that line, because on Friday we may have seen the end of the Civil War rivalry as we know it, and we can pump our own gas. Talk about a real shot to the identity as Oregonian system.
Yeah, I mean, if it's when it rains, it pours. And nobody knows that better than those of us in Oregon. And I mean, the thing with the Big Ten and Oregon State, Justin, you're from here too, and I think that growing up here, it just sort of was part of the framework and structure of how we identify. I talked to Paul Evans, a legislator who was raising some serious questions about the Big Ten move on Friday. And he said, in Oregon, we're not Republicans and Democrats, we're Ducks and Beavers. Mm-hmm. And I think that is true. And that only works in a two-party system, right? If there's the Ducks and there's the Beavers, and they are more or less equal counterweights. And by going to the Big Ten, Oregon almost says out loud the quiet part. People have liked to say that the Ducks are bigger and better, and obviously over the last 30 years, the University of Oregon athletics department has been on a different trajectory. But being in the Pac-10, Pac-12, playing the rivalry games, Oregon State always sort of had this chance, and maybe it was a little bit of an uphill climb in terms of getting to the biggest stage. I go back to the 2009 Civil War game when Oregon State and Oregon were playing for the Rose Bowl, and Oregon State was a quarter away, and it was Oregon that slammed the door. That's kind of the beauty of a rivalry, where it really matters, and there's a way to get there. That kind of goes away. The faucet gets turned off with Oregon going to the Big Ten and Oregon State, somewhere less than.
Well, and let's dive into that, because obviously I've talked about it a ton this morning. There's going to be some discussions. There's going to be some talks about how do they keep the rivalry? Do they keep the game? You kind of put it in your column. I am in complete agreement with you that it's not going to be the same. A week 3 warm September afternoon Oregon State game just doesn't have the same feel. You kind of mentioned that 2009 game. I know very much where I was in 2000 when Joey Harrington threw every single one of those interceptions and talking about closing the door on what was supposed to be a special Oregon season, right? I know where I was the next year in a driving rainstorm when Keenan Howry returned the punt in a game that was far too close for comfort. Like all of that stuff, it just can't possibly be the same week 3 September in 78 and sunny and short sleeves. You know what I mean?
And listen, they could be great games, and it could develop into something different, and that's also great. But what I worry about with Oregon and Oregon State now going forward is, will there come a time where there really isn't an appetite really from either program to play it? If Oregon is has so many resources and such a recruiting edge, and Oregon State is if Oregon State is playing a Big Ten opponent on its schedule every single year. That feels a little problematic to me if Oregon State is trying to, make a national push from a Mountain West or a diminished Pac-12. Do they really want to be playing a Big Ten opponent every single year? Does Oregon want to risk? I mean, there's nothing but downside for Oregon to play Oregon State. Because that is a loss you just really can't take if you're a Big Ten team. With your care for a national profile. Now, that's also what you signed up for by going to the Big Ten. So, I hope they still play it. I know a lot of Beaver fans, right now are, raising a stink that they don't want to ever see Oregon on the football field ever again. They can pound sand. And I don't think that's true. And that's not what I want to see. I don't think that's good for the state. But I just hate that what it has been is now gone. And, we'll have it one more time on November 24th at Austin. But that'll be the last time that, that game is going to look like that. Now, there are plenty of people out there who will remind you that there are plenty of rivalry games that get played at the end of the season. That USC will play Notre Dame, in November every year. So there are exceptions, and maybe Oregon and Oregon State become one of those exceptions, but it won't mean the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, especially because we know that like money is driving all of this, and who knows where ultimately Oregon State ends up, and not even just in the near future, but in the next 5 years. I mean, just think of what college football has done in the last 5 years, and what's going to be the next 5 years. I think of it from a TV perspective. Fox paying a lot of money for Big Ten football games. Don't think they want one of their newly acquired entities then playing a non-conference game in November. I think the money isn't going to allow it.
Yeah, I think all of that is spot on. And again, Oregon is now part of, it already had been, but it's now part of the bigger, badder world of college football where more ruthless, corporate decisions are made. There's less room for tradition. There's less room for nostalgia. And so, the fact that you have Dan Lanning saying that he wants to play a home and home into perpetuity with Oregon State is great. The fact that Rob Mullins has said that he wants to maintain the rivalry across all sports is really, really good. But like I wrote in the column, what else are they going to say on day one? If they came out and said, we're in the Big Ten now, we don't care about playing Oregon State, they get run out of town. So, they did the right thing for PR on day one, but there's some real practical concerns here too. Non-conference schedules are planned years in advance. Next year, those dates are booked, and where do you squeeze in Oregon and Oregon State? And the one thing I will say is that if Oregon and Oregon State if Oregon has an FCS opponent in the season opener next year, Big Ten schools don't play FCS teams. So if Oregon needs a replacement, Oregon State is sitting right there. Oregon State has, I think, Portland State. So if Oregon State bought out the Portland State contract to play Oregon, they could have Oregon come to Corvallis in the season opener next year, which would be great theater in all of this. If Oregon, spurns Oregon State, goes to the Big Ten, and then the first game of its new existence in the Big Ten is on the road at Reser Stadium, I know I would be there and I want to see what happens. But again, that speaks to, is that something Oregon really wants to sign up for? So I think there's a lot of questions about what it would actually look like for this rivalry to continue.
Bill Oram, columnist from the Oregonian, joining us here on 620 Rip City Radio. All right, my next question, loaded question, and obviously lots of potential answers. But Bill, you and I have both seen what has happened to this conference. It was not always as weak as it was, and I know there's not always a way to pinpoint how the heck did we get here to where it was potentially on Friday, maybe a chance if Oregon stuck around, but to where we had no TV station, no network said, hey, we really want to play games in the Bay Area, in Portland, in Seattle, in Phoenix Metro. How did the conference get here? It can't all be Larry Scott, right?
I mean, I think a lot of it's Larry Scott. I think a lot of it is presidents, chancellors. They were kind of fat and happy. They were content with where the conference was. They didn't like the idea of expansion. We've certainly heard the stories of USC squashing the idea of going on and picking off Big 12 schools when the Big 12 was in crisis. I think that there was a lot of people who just took for granted that this thing was going to keep on rolling. But when you talk about, TV markets or, TV networks not wanting the Pac-12, Justin, you and I know that the best games in the Pac-12, it could be Arizona versus Washington State on a Thursday night, and it could be the best game of the week. Mm-hmm. But, I think from a national perspective, the Pac-12 is USC and UCLA, and everybody else was second tier because of the cachet of the LA schools. And so for them to be gone, I think it makes sense that the TV deals were lesser. And the fact that it was, whatever the money was, there's some conflicting reports on that with the Apple deal. But, I lament that the Apple deal didn't work because I think there's a lot of innovation that comes from being affiliated with Apple and being kind of at the forefront of going all in on streaming. I think we're all going to be there in some form with sports in the next several years. So I don't think the Pac-12 would have been out there on its own for too long. But like Pat Kilkenny told me, and I included this in a column, you're not exactly dealing with a group of people who are prone to taking risks. University presidents are fairly risk averse. And so there was, I think, a little bit of a slowness to embrace the idea of the streaming only package. And then maybe by the time some of those presidents came around to it, Oregon had already gotten one foot out the door.
Bill Oram joining us here on 620 Rip City Radio. I mean, I think the future and the path for Oregon pretty clear. Like you said it at the beginning of the segment, they're now at the big boy table, and it is a ruthless. No friends, only business. They're outdoor cats now, right? They're in the cutthroat world of big business college football, and so I wonder, looking forward, just for college football, Bill, looking forward, is there a place? I've made this comparison, whereas Gonzaga has found their niche in college basketball because they are able to make the tournament every year. It's not because the West Coast Conference is such a great conference. It's actually been a detriment, but they make the tournament every single year. With a 12-team playoff and potentially more spots opening up to just get into, say, college football's version of the Big Dance, is there a slot for a football version of Gonzaga, or like what Boise State kind of used to be if they were ever invited, to where Oregon State and Washington State could maybe kind of find a new identity through this 12-team playoff?
I think so, because you're going to have, in a 12-team playoff, there was going to be room for, group of 5 teams to make it. You're going to have to be an 11-1, 12-0 type team. But, Oregon State has a ton of momentum right now. We've seen Washington State be good over the years. I really like Jake Dickert. I at least like Jake Dickert when he's talking about realignment. He's been the best quote in this whole thing over the last week. But I don't know how good of a coach he is. But, I mean, I'd get behind that guy any day of the week. But I think that's why you're hearing the talk about the Pac-12 or the Pac-4 wanting to add, not merge, and the idea of them wanting to kind of hand select schools to bring in, because they still want to maintain that, that A5 status and get that automatic place in the 12-team playoff. I don't know if I fully believe that there are universities out there that you can add to Washington State, Oregon State, Cal, and Stanford, and then that makes them still a high enough of a profile from a competition standpoint, from a competitiveness standpoint, to then say that group deserves a playoff spot. And then 12-team playoff is a lot different. To take the other conferences, voting them out of it, essentially, which there might be, at least in the short term, a little bit of sympathy for the state of the conference. But go get SMU, go get Boise State, San Diego State, and build out a 10 or 12 team conference, not just from the Mountain West. I mentioned SMU, go get Tulane, and build a conference and try to maintain that path. And from that standpoint, if that's something that happens, Oregon State probably has a clearer path to the playoff than Oregon does. Not because Oregon State's going to be better than Oregon every year, but because the Big Ten is an absolute gauntlet. And I think that there's a decent chance there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve for Oregon when they get to the Big Ten and the level of competition ratchets up the way it does in that conference.
I mentioned the amount of change that has gone on in college football in the last 5 years. To even try to look ahead to the next 5 years is a little bit insane. But I threw this out earlier, Bill, as a cautionary tale, right? If you are an Oregon or a Washington fan, and obviously you're breathing a sigh of relief, you got the life raft, and as you mentioned in your column, pretty good life raft going to the Big Ten. But the fact that 4 schools in Cal, Stanford, Oregon State, and Washington State could essentially be eliminated from big-time college football with the stroke of a pen and a couple of decisions. To think that they're going to be the only casualties in this moving forward, I think is a bit foolish. And how much of a possibility do you see maybe looking forward if Fox and ESPN get into another battle of do we really need Purdue and Indiana? Can we maybe get another matchup of Michigan, Ohio State? Maybe they could play twice, like they do in the NFL. I see craziness ahead for college football when you see those 4 schools can be left behind. Anybody could be left behind at this point unless you are an absolute top 20 blue blood traditional program.
I agree with you, and I don't know what it looks like. And this is something that the conversations I've had over the last few days. Everybody is looking ahead to the next wave of realignment or 2 waves down the road. Who gets left out next time? In this game of realignment roulette. And the schools that are in the Big Ten, right, are basically considered safe because they're there. But, what's to say that, at some point the Big Ten says the Rutgers thing hasn't worked out, or Northwestern doesn't fit from an athletics profile anymore. You mentioned Purdue, and then in the Big 12 as well, as the Big 12 gets bigger and stronger or gets absorbed by something else, who are the schools that get kicked to the curb? I think that there is absolutely going to be an even starker division of the haves and have-nots. And I think what this latest round has shown is that that there's a real callousness toward the idea of schools getting left behind. So if it can happen, I guess if it could happen to Oregon State and Washington State, it can happen to anybody.
Bill Oram, columnist for the Oregonian, joining us here on 620 Rip City Radio. You ended your column with "It will never be the same. It was only the dreamers and the fools who ever believed it could be." Count me as one of them. I am one of the dreamers and the fools, depending on which particular listener you're talking to at that day. But I know they always I'll be happy that it happened. Don't be sad that it's gone. And I know it's not even completely gone yet, but I'm very sad. It is a bummer. It's more than just a bummer because, again, I grew up with this rivalry. I grew up with this game, and to think that it could be just gone just like that and replaced is incredibly sad. And I don't think it's better for college football. I know it's better for some teams' pocketbooks, Bill. I don't think it's better for college football. I worry about the future of my favorite sport.
That makes you a dreamer and a fool, Justin.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
But no, absolutely. I think that's been the hardest thing about all this. Is, I can look at this from a very matched analytical point of view, and I understand why Oregon is where Oregon is and why Oregon State is where it is. But that sort of power imbalance that had sort of developed between the schools is what made it a meaningful rivalry in a lot of ways. And again, it just gave us structure in this state, and that now that goes away, and it's something special that we no longer have in the same way. And life moves on, and everything will be fine. But it's a hard one to digest.
You can follow him on Twitter at Bill Oram. You can read his columns at OregonLive.com, or you can pick up an Oregonian if you want. Hey, Bill, thanks so much for the time. Have a terrific week. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks for having me, Justin.